I am Sarah Thompson, 29, the daughter who shows up to her mother's 60th birthday with a bakery box and a plain sweater, expecting candles and coffee, not a performance. In the living room, my brother found an audience, tipped his chin, and cut me down with two words that stung worse than the cold waiting on the porch. Forks paused the room, held its breath, and in walked his boss with two coworkers, looked straight at me, and asked why the board chair was here. In a blink, the family table felt like a conference room, and every eye waited to see which version of me would answer. When the house you love turns into a room for verdicts, do you swallow it to keep the peace, or draw a line that keeps the roof steady? If you have ever stood between love and self-respect, stay with me. I will take you from one loud birthday night into the quiet work that follows, the kind you can count in training hours, paychecks, and doors opening. And I will show you how kindness with a backbone can turn a public insult into measured repair. I will not spoil the end, but I will promise you this. You will see exactly how fairness sounds in a room like ours, and you may hear your own story in it. October air in Evanston has a way of slipping under your collar, the kind that smells faintly of leaves and birthday candles. By the time I pushed open my parents' front door, the house was already full. Coats piled on the banister, casserole dishes lined the counter, and someone had parked too close to the mailbox again. I came in with a bakery box balanced on one arm and the same simple sweater I have worn to half the family occasions in my life. It was not a plan, just what felt right. Mother likes me to be comfortable, or at least she used to. Tonight she wanted celebration, not theater. From the living room, I heard that particular rising hum that means the men have found an audience. Jason was in the middle of it, standing beside the mantel, telling three sharp-looking people about a new campaign at Northbridge. The cadence was familiar, the pats on the back, the easy laughter, the way he lifted his chin just a fraction when he said the billings number. Two of them I did not recognize. The third had a smile that did not travel to his eyes. Mother was topping off coffee and nodding along as if the words were a hymn. I set the cake on the dining table and slipped into the circle to kiss Mother's cheek. She smelled like hand cream and vanilla. Someone said I had made it just in time and asked if the bakery still did those little chocolate shavings. I said yes, and that the box was heavy and that traffic on Ridge could try the patience of a saint. It was small talk designed to keep the temperature down. Jason turned toward me like he had been waiting for a cue he could not resist. He laughed too loudly and told his colleagues that his sister had finally shown up. He looked me over the way people do when they want the room to join them in a judgment. Then he raised his voice and said that I was a worthless failure. No frills, nothing decorative, just the blunt blade of it tossed into the middle of our mother's milestone. I have learned that when a slap like that lands, time narrows. Mother's hand hovered half an inch above the tablecloth. One cousin looked at his shoes. The youngest niece stopped chewing. The three Northbridge people blinked, waiting to be told whether this was entertainment or trouble. I set my hand on the back of a chair to keep my balance and felt the grain of old oak rubbed to silk by years of elbows and plates. Then I breathed. I do not know if anyone saw it, but I felt my chest lift and sink, a small tide I could control. The front door opened again. Cold air carried in voices and a rustle of garment bags. David Chen walked in first with two coworkers. I had met him from a distance, the way you meet someone when you are looking out over a ballroom and the lights are too bright. Last week, he sat 3 rows back while I spoke at the Chicago Business Council about supply chain strategy and why the Midwest still knows how to make and move things. He looked taller now, or maybe that was the doorway. He stepped over a scattered line of children's sneakers, and then he saw me, really saw me, and stopped. There is a kind of recognition that is not about celebrity. It is about files in the mind clicking into place. He had seen our company's page on LinkedIn with the clean black banner and my title, where any visitor could read it. He had heard my voice carry through a room built to magnify every vowel. He had also, a moment ago, heard Jason perform an old family script. Those things collided in his face and then settled. He asked loudly enough that even the cousins at the end of the table could hear why the board chair was here. The room hardened. It is the only way I can describe it. Conversation cooled and set. Jason's mouth fell open and the color drained from his cheeks in a way that made him look younger and meaner at the same time. Mother's coffee sloshed and a few drops landed on the saucer. Somewhere in the kitchen, the ice maker clicked. I could feel my pulse in my wrists steady as a metronome. It would have been easy to meet that moment with a list of facts to use nouns and dates like shields to slice the air with a curriculum vitae. I did not. I have learned that explanation is not always mercy. I walked toward David with my hand out and my best Sunday voice. I told him I was glad he could stop in for cake and that he should meet my mother who turned 60 today and still makes a pot roast that keeps a neighborhood fed. I told his coworkers they were welcome here and that the plates were on the buffet. I said the words in the order that keeps a home upright. I did not reference ballrooms or titles or anything with a trademark symbol. Jason stared. I did not look back at him. Sometimes the kindest way to stop a fire from spreading is to move attention toward water. We gathered around Mother and someone took the knife from the drawer, and the youngest niece announced she was in charge of candles. I helped count to 60 in fives. Mother closed her eyes for a wish. She opened them and gave me that small smile mothers use when they have been scared and will not say so. We sang softly at first, then stronger the way families do when they are trying to knit themselves back together in public. The cousins clapped. The neighbors clapped. The Northbridge people clapped because there is no wrong time to clap in America when someone is turning 60. While plates went out and coffee returned to cups, people looked at me the way people look at a photograph in a newspaper when they realize they know the person in the picture. I smiled and asked about schools, about hip surgeries, about the Bears, about the new stop sign at Church Street that is either saving lives or ruining commutes depending on who is talking. I asked David how he knew Mother, and he said the nicest things about community and longevity that any man ever said in a room full of cousins. Jason hovered at the edge of the carpet like a boy who has tracked mud and is waiting to see if anyone notices. He tried to gather his colleagues with a glance, but their eyes kept slipping toward the desserts. I have done enough hard things to know that triumph is not a thing you display. It is a thing you hold steady and quiet. I kept my voice low and my hands busy. I served David a slice with the extra roses and slid a corner to the coworker who looked like she was surviving on protein bars and willpower. Mother leaned into me while she pretended to adjust the napkins. Her whisper barely moved the air. She asked if I was all right. I told her I was fine and that the frosting was a little sweeter than I expected, which seemed to help. The room began to lift again. Forks tapped plates. Someone found an old Motown playlist on a phone and set it on the windowsill. The children ran a loop from the hallway to the porch and back until an aunt shooed them outside. I stood by the sink and washed the knife under warm water until it ran clear. I could feel the stares even with my back turned. Some were curious. Some kind of few calculating. Families are not immune to the things that organize offices. Hierarchies bloom anywhere there are chairs and a sign-in table. Tonight, an invisible line had been drawn in the middle of my parents' living room. One side said entertainment. The other said protocol. I was old enough to know which side kept a family from cracking. When I dried the knife, I could see my reflection waver in the blade. I put it away and carried fresh plates back to the dining table. I asked Mother if she wanted more coffee, and she said maybe later. I asked a neighbor about her grandson's college applications, and she lit up the way only grandmothers can. David thanked me for the cake and told Mother to save him a seat the next time pot roast was on the menu. I told him he would have to fight the cousins for it, and he laughed the way that does not make a show. The rest of the evening proceeded in that taut quiet only families can create. Nothing exploded. Nothing healed. We managed. Sometimes managing is the bravest verb available. I kept my posture easy, my tone warm, my sentences short. When it was time for candles again on a smaller slice for the niece who loves to celebrate twice, I leaned in and let the feeling of the room pass through me like weather. Outside, the October dark settled. Inside, the dishwasher hummed her steady song. I set down a stack of clean forks and decided that would be enough for one night. When the last of the candles were pinched out and the knife was back in the drawer, David caught my eye and tilted his head toward the kitchen. I followed him past the hallway photos and the line of wet boots. The kitchen light was kinder than the living room. He kept his voice low and steady. He said he was sorry for what his employee had done in front of my mother and our guests. He said the company expected better of its people no matter the room, no matter the occasion. I watched his hands while he spoke. Calm hands, the kind that have put out small fires before. He took his phone from his pocket and unlocked it with a practiced swipe. He told me he would set a boundary tonight, so there would be no confusion tomorrow. He drafted a note to the group that had come with Jason. The words were short and clean. No commentary on a guest family matters. Observance of speaking standards whenever coworkers are present. Anything internal will be addressed by HR according to policy. I stood beside the old bread box and listened to the tap of his thumb. He read the message to make sure it sounded like the company and not a man in a kitchen trying to fix a family bruise. Then he pressed send. I thanked him. I told him I did not want tonight to cost anyone a paycheck. I said that loudly enough for my own heart to hear it. He nodded and answered that accountability did not always equal punishment. He said people sometimes needed the right rules at the right moment. I believed him. Not because he was a vice president, but because he had carried himself like a guest who understood the dignity of a birthday. He paused, asked if I needed a glass of water. I told him I was fine. He slid the phone back into his pocket and promised he would be the one to speak to HR in the morning, so the matter stayed contained and clean. We stepped back into the dining room together. Mother looked over from the coffee carafe with a question in her eyes. I touched her hand. Then I pulled out a chair and sat where the cousins could see me, where my presence would be a signal that the machinery of a Midwestern party still worked. I asked Aunt Lila to tell the story of the snowstorm when the power went out and she cooked pancakes on the fireplace grate. She never tells it the same way twice. Tonight she remembered the smell of singed batter and how the neighbors came with a can of peaches. People laughed at the right places. Laughter landed like good bread. I told the one about Mother and the cornbread at the church picnic that fell apart, and still won second place because the judge said flavor beats structure every time. Mother rolled her eyes at me, but her mouth softened. The Northbridge co-workers smiled, unsure if they were allowed to laugh, then relaxed when they saw they were not the first to laugh. The room warmed by degrees. I poured coffee into a row of cups and set sugar within reach. I handed David a slice of cake that leaned too far to one side, and he said that uneven frosting was the mark of a real celebration. It was an easy line, but he earned it. Jason kept his head down. He sat a little apart from his colleagues, close enough to claim them, but far enough that he could pretend he needed to check a text. He picked at the edge of a napkin. He stirred a full cup without drinking it. I felt the pull to watch him, but I let the room lead me. The room needed a mother on her birthday. To feel like a mother was still being celebrated. Dad remained in his favorite chair near the lamp and the old stack of Reader's Digest. He said very little. He watched everything. It is his way of saying he is present without making more weather. I asked the neighbor who just had knee surgery how her physical therapy was going, and she told me the therapist liked to talk about Chicago sports to distract her during the hard parts. I asked the cousin packing for college if he had found a roommate who knew how to use a vacuum. He laughed and said he was bringing a small one that fit under the bed. Mother refilled the bowl of pretzels, as if pretzels could stitch a family back together. Some nights they can. The children dashed in for seconds and were shooed back out again. Even the dog settled under the table like a small warm anchor. David stood and thanked Mother for the hospitality. He said he would see her again, and she said, "Of course, any friend of Jason is welcome." And she almost stumbled on the word friend, but caught herself like a ballerina in church shoes. She touched his elbow in that old-fashioned way that says, "Thank you for your manners." He shook Dad's hand. He told me the email was sent, and that he appreciated my clarity about jobs. Then he gathered his group. They put on their coats, said their good nights, and stepped into the October dark with that careful speed people use when they are leaving a house where the air has thinned. As the door shut, the room exhaled. Plates scraped. Coffee cooled. Mother sorted leftover cake into plastic containers and asked me to label them for the neighbors who always return containers with a thank you note stuck inside. Dad rinsed the knife under the tap. I wiped the counter and stacked the plates. Jason drifted near the hallway like a man who has lost the map of his own family. He did not meet my eyes. He did not speak. There are silences that invite repair. There are silences that warn you off. This one did neither. It simply existed like fog that will not burn off until noon. People put on coats and hugged carefully. Even the cousins who always leave laughing left with a softer step. They knew where the revelation had come from. They knew it could not be stuffed back into the evening like a napkin in a drawer. The shame that had flushed Jason's face at the wrong moment had not faded. It hovered near the ceiling like steam. I kissed Mother's cheek and told her that the lilies would last a few more days if she changed the water tomorrow. She nodded and asked if I could stay to help box the last of the cake. I stayed and we worked side by side, and we did not try to name what had shifted. Sunday came in pale over Evanston quiet enough that I could hear the kettle tick. Before it boiled, my phone buzzed. A note from Naomi Brooks at Crane's Chicago Business asked to verify something from a birthday photo. A relative had posted a public album on Facebook after midnight and tagged me. The tag had already been scraped by a media dashboard faster than you think. I opened the album. Mother framed by carnations. Frosting on little hands. My profile caught near the sink. In one image, the Northbridge colleague stood in the doorway like an extra headline. It was not a scandal, only context without context. That is trouble enough. I took screenshots that showed the timestamp and the URL and sent them to our communications inbox with 2 lines. Documentation first. Feelings later. Renee Alvarez answered almost immediately. She thanked me for the screenshots, said she would treat the album as public until the owner changed the settings, and proposed one neutral sentence if we responded at all. Honor family. Keep work separate. No color. No defense. It sounded like her measured and useful. While coffee dripped, I forwarded Naomi's email to Renee and to our general counsel, Alicia Grant. I wrote that a relative had posted publicly that I was tagged and that I wanted our response aligned. Alicia replied with her usual plain clarity. Send a clean conflict of interest disclosure to David Chen's state recusal from any Northbridge matters copy legal. Keep the tone crisp and professional. No narrative, only the boundary. I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and drafted the disclosure before I touched the keyboard. I stated my role. I noted the family relationship to a Northbridge employee. I noted that Northbridge staff had been present at a private family gathering. I stated my immediate recusal from any present or future exchange that could touch their company. I thanked David for his professionalism the night before. Then I typed it, read it once for leaks of emotion, and sent it with Alicia on copy. When it left my outbox, I felt something inside the house of my day click into place. Naomi wrote again to say she would not use the photo if the owner took it down or switched it to private. Renee reached out to the relative with a gentle explanation of visibility settings and a request for written confirmation. She logged each step in a media file so the trail would be clear later. I checked the coffee and let the steam rise against my face like a small reminder that mornings can still be kind. Mother came in wearing her robe and the slippers that whisper against the tile. She asked if I had slept. I said enough. I sat her at the table and explained what needed explaining. Not only the title, the years of choosing quiet at home so I could be loud where it mattered. The difference between keeping a family comfortable and keeping a company honest. She listened with her hands around the mug. Proud and unsure lived in the same sentence. She asked whether Jason would be heard at work. I told her that was not my decision to make, and that I would not step inside Northbridge's internal process. Dad followed with the paper and that look he saves for subjects with more corners than he can see at once. He asked what a board chair does in plain terms. I said stewardship, not spectacle. Strategy and oversight. Making sure the people who run the machine have what they need and are accountable for how they use it. He nodded like a man who does not pretend to know a thing he does not know, and said he would like to understand more when there was time. I said there would be time. By late morning, Renee forwarded a note from our relative. The album had been switched to private and the tag removed. The message included a small apology and a line about not realizing anyone beyond the family would pay attention. Naomi confirmed the change and said the photo would not run in any context. She thanked me for being direct and timely. I thanked her for asking before assuming. Courtesy is a fence that keeps larger animals out of the garden. I sent David a brief acknowledgement that legal had my disclosure on file. He replied he had received it and that HR would handle anything that concerned their own staff. No action needed on my side. It was a relief to see a sentence that matched the posture he had taken in my mother's kitchen. Boundaries feel best when they are mutual. After lunch, I labeled a few containers for the neighbors, so the right leftovers would find the right doors. Mother stretched out on the couch and fell into the kind of sleep that makes a room quieter simply by existing. Dad pretended to read and mostly watched her breathing even out. I set my planner on the table and blocked time for the week meetings and calls, and a slot for the council invitation that would need attention soon. Then I closed the cover and let the silence do its work. I sent Renee a final thank you for moving quickly, and Alicia a note that I would be available if legally needed anything further. Both replied with short confirmations. I put the phone face down and studied the way the light fell across the sink. People talk about a crisis as a storm. Sometimes it is a series of small decisions made at the right speed. Document. Notify. Disclose. Reassure. Reassure again. I thought about Jason and felt that odd mix of ache and resolve that belongs to sisters of grown men. I would not call his boss. I would not call his HR. I would not write a narrative to make anyone look better or worse. I would keep my side of the line clean. By mid-afternoon, the house had settled into its Sunday rhythm. A neighbor rang for containers. I handed over a cake and a note for her husband's recovery. She promised to return the box, as she always does, with a thank you tucked beneath the lid. When the door closed, I stood still for a long moment, listening to the ordinary sounds a home makes when it remembers itself. Then I poured the last of the coffee and let the day move forward. Monday came gray over Chicago. The calendar did not care about birthdays. I was at my desk before 8 with coffee that tasted like backbone. Overnight messages lined up like small soldiers. At the top sat a brief note from David acknowledging my disclosure. Any internal matter would go through HR. The language was spare and firm. Boundaries work when both sides honor them. I opened my project list and let my eyes land on Henderson. It needed signatures and steady hands. Marcus sent a status that the deal team was ready for the next gate. Alicia followed with a DocuSign packet and a power of attorney, so Marcus could execute technical paperwork if the window tightened. I read each page for the parts that make numbers honest and people accountable. Then I sent Marcus a simple confirmation and closed the tab. My attention stayed where it belonged. Across the river, Northbridge turned on its lights and logged in. Later I would learn that Linda Park, their HR director, opened a case under Workplace Conduct and Code of Ethics. The file noted a public insult at an event attended by employees and the potential impact on the firm's reputation. She booked an interview room. She requested a written statement from Jason. She scheduled 2 coworkers as witnesses for setting and timing. She pulled the policy pages and placed them in order. The procedure moved forward, not fast, not slow, just according to its own clock. I kept to my side. I met with operations about throughput in Joliet and asked where a bottleneck had crept in after last week's surge. I approved a travel change for a junior manager whose mother had taken a fall. I marked up a regional brief and trimmed 2 adjectives that were posing as insight. I ate almonds at my desk instead of pastry after a family weekend. When the screen pinged, I let messages arrive and leave without attaching any of them to my brother's name. It was Monday. It was work. It was enough. Near noon, Alicia checked in with a 2-sentence note. Legal had archived my disclosure and logged the recusal where auditors could find it. She reminded me that silence can also be a record. I thanked her and let the reminder settle in. The urge to narrate restraint is loud on days like this. I kept my voice out of rooms where it did not belong and let the paper trail do the talking. From the hall window, the river slid under its bridges in a steady line. Offices within a mile were turning small storms into files. Somewhere at Northbridge, Linda explained that due process protects everyone. Somewhere Jason read a policy page and saw paragraphs instead of faces at our mother's table. I let the picture fade and returned to the numbers on my screen. Mid-afternoon, Marcus came by with the Henderson timeline. He spoke in the shorthand of people who have built things side by side. The counterparty was aligned. The risk committee had cleared the path. Signatures would start tomorrow unless someone blinked. He asked if he should execute under the power of attorney if the window narrowed while I was with my parents. I told him yes. Treat the signature block like a hinge. Open, close, no wobble. He nodded and carried the timeline back to his team. I kept my phone face down through the last meeting. Near 5, I checked it. David had sent a second note. He confirmed receipt of my acknowledgement and stated that HR would proceed under policy with no action required from me. The message was brief and neutral in tone. That neutrality was a kindness. I replied with 2 lines thanking him for the update and restating my recusal. Then I put the phone away and turned to the last items on my list. By late afternoon, the outline of the Northbridge process was clear. Linda informed Jason that the investigation would follow due process. If a violation was substantiated, the outcome could include a written warning. Those were not my words, and did not need my involvement. I learned of the conversation only as a ripple across the surface, a courtesy copy that existed to show a disclosure was where it should be. I read it once. I did not forward it. I did not call my mother. I did not drive by the building on Wacker to see who walked out at what time. I let the system carry its own weight. I signed 2 vendor approvals and answered a logistics question about winter stock and salt deliveries. I sent Renee a brief note that media interest around the birthday photos had cooled and thanked her team for moving quickly. She answered with a thumbs up in words the written version of a nod from across a conference table. Small confirmations are the oil that keeps a week from grinding. The office thinned as people headed to trains and daycare pickups and grocery runs. Coats went on screens, went dark chairs rolled home to desks. I shut my laptop and let the reflection settle. In the glass I could see a woman holding 2 truths with both hands. I love my brother. I will not bend a process that exists to correct what careless words can harm. Both can be true. Both must be true if a family and a company are to survive the same season. I slid my planner into my bag and turned off the light. The corridor smelled faintly of paper and coffee. Outside streetlights woke in a staggered line. The bridges held their usual patience. The evening felt ordinary, which is another way of saying that order had held. I walked toward the train with my phone quiet, my feet steady, and my line intact. Sometimes the bravest work is not a speech or a scene. It is a day in which nothing dramatic happens because the adults did what the policies asked them to do. By early evening, I was back in Evanston with a grocery sack and a promise to keep things simple. Mother had a roast in the oven and a pot of green beans clicking against the lid. The house smelled like buttered rolls in a calm you could borrow from a recipe card. I set out plates and folded napkins the way she likes them, pointing toward the fork, not the knife. My phone buzzed on the counter. Jason had sent a short text saying he could not make dinner. No reason, only absence. Mother read my face before I could tuck it away. She stirred the beans and asked if I would help set a time later in the week for the 2 of us to talk without an audience. She wanted plain conversation, no surprises, just a table and a clock. I told her yes. Then I added what had been building since Saturday. Before any talk, Jason would need to own what he did in front of our family and his colleagues, and he would need to commit to stop belittling kin in public. Minimum terms of respect. Not a speech. A baseline. Mother leaned against the counter and let the lid settle. She did not argue. She asked if we should say it first or write it down so no one lost their temper. I said either was fine as long as it was clear and whole. She nodded and reached for the oven mitt. The roast released a breath of time and heat that made the kitchen feel a size larger. We set the table without mentioning the empty chair. Habit can be a mercy on nights like this. Dad came in from the porch with the day folded under his arm. He washed his hands, dried them with the towel that always falls off the stove handle, and took his spot at the end. We said grace the way we do when we need structure more than sentiment. The conversation started with the weather and moved to the neighbor's new snowblower. We ate, and the food did its work. Midway through the meal, a quiet settled. Not brittle, the kind that makes room. Dad cleared his throat. He said he had favored Jason for years because he believed I was fine and needed less of him. He said he was sorry for what that had taught both his children. 4 sentences, careful and clean. I let them stand. I did not interrogate them or balance them against old ledgers. I said I heard him and that I accepted the apology. Mother reached for the potatoes as if starch could keep us steady. She said she would feel better if the dinner with Jason had witnesses. She meant her and Dad at a side table present to keep tempers low and timing honest. She said the goal was repair, not theater. I pictured the dining room we were in and the corners that collect old feelings, and I understood why a neutral place might help. I suggested a quiet restaurant with strong coffee and a back booth. Mother brightened at the thought of a public space where voices have to choose civility. We settled on Thursday, 6 o'clock, at a little place on Central, where the waitress calls everyone sweetheart and splits checks into exact thirds without blinking. After the dishes were cleared, I took my planner from my bag and blocked the hour. I wrote the baseline terms on a small card in my own words. Ownership of the public insult. Commitment to stop belittling family in front of others. No exceptions. No clever workarounds. I slid the card into an envelope and placed it by Mother's keys so she could hand it to Jason if she chose. Dad stacked leftovers into containers and labeled them with a black marker the way he labels screws in the garage. Routine has always been his prayer. Mother packed me a small bag with roast and beans and a piece of cake that looked like it had forgiven the party. She asked if I would text Jason the place and time, or if she should. I told her she should, and that the message should carry only the facts. Time, place, purpose. I said I would answer if he wrote to me after he had read the terms. She nodded. The oven ticked as it cooled. The house felt like a person exhaling. I sat up at the kitchen table with my laptop while Mother folded towels. 2 work messages waited unimpressed by families. I answered a question about a vendor's delivery window and sent Marcus a short note that Thursday evening was blocked for a personal obligation and that he should use the power of attorney if anything tightened. Then I closed the computer and refused to let the evening sag into what-ifs. We had a date. We had a place. We had the minimum standard written down. Before I left, Mother walked me to the door and asked if I was nervous. I told her I was steady. Nerves were for performances. Thursday would be a line, not a performance. She smiled in that small way that belongs to women who have kept families stitched through worse winters. Dad handed me the bag of leftovers and said he would drive by the restaurant at 5:50 and make sure the booth was open. That was his way of standing guard without stepping into the conversation. In the car, I sat for a minute with the engine off and the bag on my lap. The phone stayed quiet. I watched the glow from the kitchen window and the shape of my parents moving around each other the way they have practiced for decades. Then I started the car and headed home. At a red light, I repeated the sentence I use with teams in hard quarters. Clarity is kindness. Thursday would be clear. That would be enough for now. Tuesday opened bright over Chicago and my inbox matched the sky. By mid-morning, I had moved 2 meetings, approved a small line for software seats, and blocked an hour to prepare for Thursday. The kettle clicked off just as my phone started a different kind of buzzing. Renee sent a flag through our internal channel that chatter had begun. An anonymous advertising subreddit claimed I had flaunted a title at a family party and used power to shame a relative. A LinkedIn thread echoed it with 3 near-identical comments. None of it carried detail. It was rumor-shaped to fit any room. We keep a script for mornings like this. Renee's team captured screenshots with timestamps and full URLs, recorded the public handles, and saved the exact text before edits could blur the edges. One analyst logged platform context, whether the accounts were new or newly awake. They filed the package in our media folder with a clean name and noted it in the tracker. The process keeps the noise small. I forwarded the set to Alicia with one line asking for a legal view. She replied with her usual economy. No chases, no side messages, no attempts to unmask. Keep it institutional. If we respond, use one neutral sentence that holds 2 ideas. We respect family, and we keep work separate. Attach a redacted image of the relevant board minutes the page that states our governance and the conflict protocol that applies to my seat, the same way it would apply to any chair. Renee and I met in a small conference room with the blinds at half. She laid out 2 options on a single sheet: remain silent and archive, or post the neutral line on our company page with the minutes attached. She made the case for the second path. Silence is fine when the rumor stays in the corner. This had already stepped into a professional network we use to recruit and partner. One simple statement would set a frame without feeding the fire. I agreed. This was not a debate. It was work. By noon, the post was ready. Our company page carried one line that said, "We honor our families and keep our work separate." Beneath it sat a cropped image of the minutes with names and contact details masked the sentences about oversight and recusal left in full view. The date and page number remained, so the document looked like itself and not a prop. We did not name another company. We did not describe Saturday. We set a standard and returned to our desks. Renee's team watched the first wave. A few comments tried to bait us into a back and forth dressed as concern. Most were brief acknowledgments from people who have seen families and jobs collide in less tidy rooms. A number of senior women stepped in with their own lines about governance and thresholds. They did not ask for gossip. They thanked us for putting the procedure in daylight. A dean from a business school liked the post. A retired CFO wrote that structure keeps people from cutting each other when feelings run high. The conversation shifted from who did what to a small case study in standards. While comments found a rhythm, Alicia asked communications to archive the thread every hour for the rest of the day. Platforms move fast, and memory on the internet is both short and selective. Renee set reminders and told her analysts to capture the top replies and the timestamps of any edits. It sounded like overkill until a regulator asked a question 6 months later. I do not get surprised anymore. I stayed off the threads. I did not text my mother or my brother. I did not go find the original post because strangers do not hold anything I need. I handled a plant tour note for Elgin, confirmed a morning call with a client, and skimmed a winter salt update in case the lake decided to throw January at us early. Routine was not denial. It was ballast. Around 2, I stood and let the sunlight move across the building opposite ours. My calendar pinged. I told Marcus that Thursday evening remained blocked and to use the power of attorney if timing compressed. He replied with a short acknowledgement and a line about the risk committee asking for one more footnote that would not change the schedule. Work has a way of lifting your chin. The second wave on LinkedIn tilted more positively than the first. A few longtime colleagues tapped like and kept moving. Several women added a sentence about navigating their own Thanksgiving tables with an executive title that never matched what an aunt believed. No one asked for names. No one demanded a recount of Saturday. The post began to look like a small lesson in handling a human moment without turning it into a brand moment. That was the point. At 3, Renee sent a line that the subreddit thread had slowed, and a moderator had tagged it with a reminder to avoid personal information. She attached the latest archive with those clean file names that make auditors breathe easier. Alicia confirmed nothing in the current discourse required escalation. She added the reminder she always adds: do not read it twice. Archive once, then return to the work that matters. I set notifications to digest for the rest of the day. Late afternoon, I checked the time against Thursday's dinner. I took out the small card I had written and slid it into my planner where I could see it without a screen. Ownership of the public insult. Commitment to stop belittling family in front of others. Minimum terms. No exceptions. It felt as ordinary as a grocery list and as necessary as one. I closed the planner and finished my last call. Before shutting down, I glanced at our page. The post stood like a clean streetlight, showing what was needed and nothing more. I signed out and set my phone so only my parents could reach me after dark. On the walk to the elevator, I reminded myself of a rule that has kept more than 1 week sane. The internet is not my family. It does not sit at our table. It receives an archive and a clear line drawn by one sentence and a page number. The rest of the week belongs to the living. Morning light slid across my desk. In my inbox sat Henderson's binding letter of intent. 3 years, 2024 through 2027, valued at $75 million. A number like that asks for steadiness. I read the cover note twice, forwarded it to Marcus with a simple receipt, and looped in Alicia so legal could begin its clean march through checklists. Renee answered with a brief acknowledgement and noted that communications had draft language ready for a quiet announcement when we gave the word. An hour later, I heard from Evelyn Hart of the Chicago Business Council. The council wanted me on its November program. Supply chains, workforce, the pocketbook topics that land on kitchen tables when bills come due. I pictured that ballroom with its complicated chandeliers and remembered the weight of a microphone in my hand last week. The invitation was an honor, and it was also a light that could spill into corners I preferred unlit. I accepted, then asked that the billing lean toward regional jobs and practical partnerships. No flourish. No biography. Evelyn said that matched the city's mood. After lunch, we met in a small conference room with the blinds at half. Marcus placed the LOI on the table pages clipped in tidy stacks. Renee brought 2 short versions of a press note. Alicia's legal pad held 3 ordinary risks and 1 personal note. Public attention, she said, could swell beyond what a family can carry in a fragile week. No one needed names to understand the point. We were there to do work, not turn the office into a stage. We walked the choices in one breath. Announce now in a neutral tone, wait until after the council event, or coordinate with Henderson, so the first paragraph led with jobs and the second with access for small and mid-sized firms across the Midwest. We tested each option for ego leaks. Renee argued for staying on schedule with modest language. Waiting could look like hiding. Going big would invite noise the internet might shape into something else. Marcus agreed. Numbers need context, not confetti. Alicia nodded and asked only that we keep family out of every channel and use the same governance phrases we always use. Not because of last weekend, but because that is how we talk. We settled it. Announcement on schedule, soft tone, no personal stories. Emphasize hiring supplier stability training dollars and the Midwest towns that keep factories breathing. Graphics would be simple. A map. A short list of counties and sectors. Renee would prepare a 1-page brief for reporters who still prefer print, including a paragraph on how our model pairs veteran operators with younger managers so knowledge does not evaporate when someone retires. As we stood, Naomi from Cranes sent a clean inquiry asking for a post-event interview in November. She added a line that she would avoid any personally identifying family detail. I appreciated that and asked her to place the boundary in writing for her editor. She agreed without fuss. It is a relief when a journalist shows you where the walls are before you have to point to them. Between meetings, I called Mother and kept it short. I told her Henderson had delivered that the council wanted me to speak in November and that I would like her in the audience if she felt up to it. She went quiet for a breath, then said she would sit where she could see me and still pretend to fuss with her purse if nerves tried to take the wheel. She sounded proud and a little winded. She reminded me to keep things calm for Jason. I told her the announcement would be modest and that no one here would carry family into a public room. I could hear dishes in the background, the gentle clink that tells you a kitchen is steady. The afternoon moved on with familiar tasks. Marcus and I set the internal sequence that would carry signatures across time zones if needed. Alicia reviewed the LOI and marked two phrases for Henderson's counsel to smooth, not to change meaning, only to avoid ambiguity 6 months from now, when people forget the spirit and cling to the letters. Renee trimmed the release until each sentence could carry its own weight. We kept the headline plain: Henderson commits to multi-year partnership to support regional growth. No bragging verbs, no applause-seeking adjectives. I asked Renee to post on our site early next week, then share a short version on professional channels with comments limited and messages routed to a monitored inbox. She filed the requests and sent a mock-up that looked like our brand on a calm day. Quiet colors. Useful numbers. A short quote that sounded like a grown woman who respects the people who build things for a living. Near 5, I stepped to the hall window and let the steady schedule, not metaphors, do the comforting. Naomi confirmed the interview slot and repeated her promise to avoid family detail. I thanked her and saved the note. Habit can be a shield when opinions heat up. On the way out, I called Mother again and gave her the council date. She said she would circle it on the calendar and tuck a scarf in her purse in case the ballroom ran cold. She asked if I was taking care of myself. I told her I was eating real food and sleeping like a person who has learned that sleep does not make you soft, it makes you ready. She laughed the small laugh she uses when relief starts to win. Back at my desk, I signed off on the final release and handed the file to Renee. I asked Marcus to carry the operational quote because the job story belongs to the people who keep the machine running. He agreed, and I could hear the smile in his reply. I shut down my screen and let the office settle. The work was lined up. The attention would be managed. The family would be left in peace. For a quiet moment, I stood still and felt the balance of it, not perfect but fair. At Northbridge, the tools did their job before any human could. I learned this later, piecing the order of things from a tidy email and the way careful companies move. A data loss prevention alert fired on Jason's account when he forwarded an internal thread to an outside address. The system flagged board chair Sarah Thompson while the sentence about my recusal was missing. Machines do not weigh motives. They flag exceptions and forward them. Security pinged Linda Park with the alert package. She booked a glass room with a small table that made everyone mindful. She invited Jason and 2 people from IT to walk through the logs and David Chen as the leader responsible for the team. Linda printed the policy page on communications and reputation. A short subsection names public misunderstanding as a risk on par with theft. Plain language that has saved more careers than anyone will count. While that calendar block held its shape in another building, my morning stayed ordinary. I signed the last red lines on a vendor contract. I returned a call about a plant tour in Cicero. I ate soup at my desk and answered a note from a client who prefers Tuesday deliveries because Wednesday always gets away from him. I thought about Thursday night once and put the thought back where it belonged. I will prepare. Preparation is quieter than rehearsal. In Linda's room, they opened a laptop and showed the DLP trace. They pointed to the outbound address and the timestamp. They enlarged the body of the message and read the line that traveled and the context that did not. Linda set the policy beside the keyboard and explained how a partial truth can do the harm of a lie when it leaves the network with a company signature on it. She did not raise her voice. A steady process can be louder than volume. David handed over the disclosure I had sent on Sunday and told HR the company had been notified in full and on time. He underlined the date and gave the file its spine because a folder must hold every page it should. Jason, the note would later say, admitted he had acted rashly. He signed a write-up. He did not argue the facts. He could not. The screen had already kept score. Linda issued a formal warning and enrolled him in a performance improvement plan running from the end of October through the end of November. Weekly check-ins. A refresher on media ethics. A refresher on data security. A final meeting to confirm that what had been learned had also been used. Any repeat would end the employment not as a surprise, but as the outcome spelled out in the paper he had just signed. David added his piece. He required completion of both training within 7 days and proof to HR via the system timestamp, not a screenshot. I knew none of this until late afternoon when David sent a message with the subject line "Courtesy Update." The body was pure policy. HR had opened the case, IT had provided logs, a warning had been issued, a PAP had been set, training had been assigned. Northbridge had my conflict disclosure on file acknowledged available for any future review. No action required from me. He thanked me for keeping a clean line. I read it once and replied with 2 lines to acknowledge receipt. I crossed off nothing because none of it belonged on my ledger. Punishment slams. Correction hinges. Companies cannot fix a heart, but they can correct a habit. They can show which actions pull risk into the room and which push it out. I let that be simple. I did not forward the email to my mother or my father. I did not mention it to Marcus or Renee or Alicia. The only people who needed to know already knew. That is the point of a working system. Near 5, I stretched my hands and felt the ache that comes from typing more than lifting. I printed Thursday's reservation confirmation and tucked it behind the small card I had written earlier in the week. Ownership of the public insult. Commitment to stop belittling family in front of others. Minimum terms. No exceptions. I slid the card back into my planner. My phone buzzed with a calendar reminder for a logistics call in the morning. I confirmed the time, closed the screen, and let the office sounds fall to their evening pace. On the way out, I stopped by the window long enough to watch a delivery truck ease into the alley. Most work lives in small rooms with fixed costs and clear rules. A tool flagged a message. HR convened a meeting. An employee signed a plan. It is not dramatic. It is how damage is contained before it hardens into harm. I wrapped my scarf and took the elevator down, grateful for the kind of order that does not ask for applause. On the train home, I watched the blur of warehouses and side streets that never make the news. Somewhere, a time clock would beep, a door would lock, a floor would be swept. I thought about the arc of the week, how the loudest moment had already passed and left behind a trail of forms and signatures, designed to keep people from hurting each other more than they already had. Consequences follow choices. Not my will, not my victory. Only the quiet comfort of a process doing its job. The cafe on Central kept its lights low and its music softer than the hiss of the espresso machine. I chose a small table against the back wall where the door and the clock sat in the same line of sight. Jason arrived late by 6 minutes. The kind of late that tells you a man is still deciding whether to show. He looked worn, a little gray at the edges. I stood and sat in one motion and kept my hands visible on the table. Mother and Dad took coffees at a table by the window, close enough to steady us, far enough to let us talk. I told him I was here to talk about next steps, not to replay Saturday. I did not want his career to implode, and I would not stand between him and consequences if he kept crossing lines. My voice stayed level. The words left no place to hide. He studied the menu he was not reading and kept quiet for 3 long beats. I took a folded card from my planner and set it beside his water. 3 points, each one his to choose and carry. First, apologize to the family and to a small circle of coworkers for the public insult. Not a speech. A sentence that admits what was done and names who was hurt. Second, lead a 3-month pro bono community campaign with outcomes we can verify at the end. That means a real plan with numbers that can be checked. Third, send an internal email at Northbridge acknowledging that he misunderstood professional lines and stating clearly that he will not repeat it. No color, no blame. 1 paragraph that lives in the system. He asked if I was here to lecture him. He did not raise his voice, but heat was in the words. No, I said. I would not call David or HR or run interference. The list was not a test. It was a path he could own without borrowing anyone else's name. He leaned back and rubbed his jaw the way Dad does when a bolt will not catch pride and fear sharing the same shape. He said I was acting like a board chair in a room that needed a sister. I let that land. Then I reminded him of the afternoon in high school, when two boys decided I was an easy target near the bleachers. He had stepped in without showing his teeth and moved them along without making me small. I told him I believe he still knows how to do the right thing when he chooses accountability over show. His shoulders dropped half an inch. He looked down at the card. We walked through the pieces the way adults do when the outcome matters. He asked what a campaign could look like. I said to pick a reachable neighborhood and a nonprofit that can absorb volunteers. Set a 3-month clock, put dates on a calendar, recruit 2 or 3 colleagues whose skills travel track hours and outputs, then end with a short summary that states results without selling them. He asked who needed to hear the apology at work. I said his immediate team and anyone who stood in a doorway on Saturday and felt their suit turn into armor. He asked how many sentences the internal email should be. 4 would be enough. He said none of this would guarantee anything. I agreed. Guarantees are not how grown-ups live. We build evidence and let time carry it. The point is not to erase what happened. The point is to build new weight where his word has grown light. He said he hated that he had made our mother cry without tears. I said I did too. We let that sit between us until it cooled. I repeated that I would not fix anything for him. I would not make a call. I would not translate his intent to anyone. I would not step in front of a process built to correct what he chose to ignore. He could take the card or leave it. He could write his own if he did not like mine. What he could not do was wait for me to carry him across a gap he dug. He folded the card twice and slid it into his pocket like a map he was not sure he would follow. He thanked me without looking up. Obligation sat inside the word and something else I could not name. He said he needed time. He had it, I said. Thursday's dinner could still hold a first step if he wanted it to. He nodded and pressed his lips into a single line. We stood. He told Mother he had to get back. She touched his sleeve and let him go. Dad watched him cross the sidewalk and did not call his name. I remained at the table and finished my coffee. The cup had gone cool. The room held the sound of plates and low talk and the small kindnesses of a weekday afternoon. I looked at the clock, then at the door and left the table as we had found it. Neat, plain, ready for the next people. Mid-November brought a cold that made marble floors ring under heels. The Palmer House Hilton had dressed itself the way old hotels do, with light catching on gold trim and mirrors that made the room look endless. I checked in with the stage manager, pinned the small badge to my lapel, and stood for a breath behind the curtain. On a side table sat a pitcher of water and a stack of programs. Henderson appeared on the second page mid-list, right where substance lives. I walked out to a warm murmur. Evelyn Hart welcomed the room and introduced me with a few sentences that stayed with work. I took my place at the lectern and let the lights find me. I kept it brief. I spoke about our team's mix of experience and curiosity, what strategic advisory means for the real economy and the Midwest as a place that keeps its promises. Then I announced the Henderson Partnership for 2024 through 2027 and set the number inside sentences about job supplier stability and training dollars that stay close to home. I kept my family out of it. The story belonged to the people who would carry the work. The applause rose and fell. I thanked the council, nodded to the sponsors, and stepped aside while the next voice moved into place. I felt a quiet steadiness, as if a long line had finally cinched tight. During the break, a few hands met mine. A plant manager from Joliet said his crew would value training funds more than a podium photo. A banker asked for the slide that showed supplier risk by county. A young woman said she had never heard freight described with that much affection and made it sound like a compliment. I smiled and pointed her toward the logistics panel. Naomi found me near the side door with her notebook closed. She asked how it feels to run large things and still be underestimated at home. I gave the only answer worth giving in public. Discipline first. Learn the work and do it when nobody is watching. Transparency next. Say what you will do and let your records show you did it. Boundaries always. Decide which rooms are for family and which rooms are for policy and honor both. I asked her to keep relatives unnamed and frame the piece around principles and outcomes. She said she understood and would keep that promise. We shook hands, and she moved back into the crowd. From the middle row, my mother rose with the careful grace she has always had. She met me just off the aisle and pulled me into the kind of hug that has nothing to do with cameras. She told me she was proud that I had kept my voice on the work. Then she said she was sorry for the years she had looked at me through an old lens that measured daughters by other women's stories. She did not talk about the past the way my father had. She spoke about the present, about what she had seen, and what she would choose to see now. I felt the apology land where it could change something. I told her she should head home and rest, and that I would call in the morning. She laughed and said she had tucked a scarf in her purse the minute she heard Palmer House, because ballrooms like to steal heat. I stepped toward the side door to let the next session begin. Across a cluster of guests, I saw Jason near a column, half in shadow, hands in his pockets. He looked thinner at the edges of himself, like a man living inside a quiet storm. He did not move toward me. I did not lift a hand. Some distances are necessary if the next step is going to be his. A volunteer handed me a glass of water and thanked me for talking about jobs, not victory laps. I told her most good news looks better on a paycheck than in a quote. She grinned and hurried off to line up the panelists. I stood and let the room be the room. It hummed with Chicago talk, traffic on the Dan Ryan, Bears predictions with more hope than math, a freight corridor that needed one more grant to open a bottleneck. The sound was ordinary, and it soothed me. When the program closed, I gathered my notes and slipped them into my bag. I checked my phone. Naomi had confirmed the interview time next week and repeated her commitment to keep family out. I thanked her and saved the note. Evelyn touched my arm as she passed and said the city would sleep better with a few more deals like this one. I told her the credit belonged to a long list of people who do not stand on stages. Mother caught my eye from the coat check and lifted her gloved hand. I waved her on. Going home, I mouthed, and she nodded. The doors opened to the hallway and then to State Street, where the air sharpened. I waited for the elevator with a handful of strangers who had just shared the same hour. None of us needed to say a word. We met at a small place in Lincoln Park that used to be a corner grocery. The tile floor had stayed the chalkboard menu too, and lamps laid a soft circle of light over tables that did not crowd you. Mother chose a seat with her back to the wall. Dad studied the breadbasket like a man who wants to divide it right. Jason arrived on time with 2 co-workers I had seen before. David and Linda followed. The staff pushed 2 tables together, leaving room for elbows and for space between words. We ordered simply soup, roast chicken, a salad that tasted like it remembered summer. Talk stayed on weather and parking and whether the street meter still ate quarters. Jason kept his eyes on his water glass. He looked steady, but fatigue had camped at his temples. He waited until plates were cleared and coffee poured. Then he rose, chair quiet behind him. He spoke about envy, how he had let it think for him. He spoke about pride, how it had taught him to move fast and swing where a man should never swing inside his own family. He spoke about errors, how he had humiliated a sister in front of people who had come for a meal and not a scene. He did not perform sorrow. He named it and stood inside it. Then he apologized, one steady sentence that stayed put. He said he had a plan he could measure. He would lead a 3-month pro bono effort with a Northside nonprofit that helps people prepare for work. He would call it Hire Back Chicago. He set targets with numbers that did not wiggle. Train at least 100. Place at least 40. Secure internship commitments from 10 businesses. He gave dates from January through March. He would recruit colleagues willing to carry their skills into rooms without budgets. Keep time and outcomes in a simple tracker and report to the nonprofit and to his team at the end. He added that the work would be on his own time and that his name would not sit in the center unless a sign needed a contact. Linda confirmed what belonged to her lane. Jason had completed the data ethics refresher and the security module. His plan was on track, and weekly check-ins would continue through November. She said it with the clear tone of a person who has said hard things kindly before. David offered the support he could. Volunteer hours would be recognized. When schedules allowed, the team would have cover to help. This would live as community work, not a campaign with logos. He had asked finance about matched giving and would share policy in the morning. He did not look for my approval. He looked at the table like it was a set of instructions. I stood long enough to show I had heard him. I said I respect apologies that walk with action. The rest was between him and the promise he would keep to himself. Then I sat. This called for one clear sentence. The room shifted in a way that had nothing to do with heat. Mother let out a breath that barely moved her napkin. Her hands found each other. Dad nodded once the way a man nods when glue is setting and you do not touch the joint. Jason's co-workers, a woman named Carla and a man named Evan, looked like people who had rehearsed words they no longer needed. Carla said she would help with intake on Saturdays. Evan said a tool and die shop on the north side might host trainees for practice interviews. They offered ideas without flourishing. We turned to practicals. Linda said the nonprofit should confirm insurance for volunteers. Background checks would be standard. Hours would be logged by the nonprofit, not by Northbridge, so the count belonged to the people who needed it. David offered to call 2 owners he knew who were already curious about giving teenagers a first look at a real shop floor. None of it sounded like a press release. It sounded like a plan. Jason stayed on his feet. He asked Linda if he could send a short internal note when the campaign began, 4 sentences that said he had misunderstood professional lines and would not repeat it. Would she review it for clarity? She said she would. She reminded him to keep the pronouns pointed at himself and the subject in the work, not the family. Her voice was kind and exact. I was grateful for a steadiness that spares a family. Coffee arrived with squares of cake and berries. No one made a toast. That felt right. Jason sat with a quiet he had not carried in weeks. He asked Carla about her father's recovery, and asked Evan if his son had found a winter coat that did not swallow him whole. He sounded like a man who remembered how to be with people without checking what they thought of him. It was a small sound. It was the sound I wanted. Mother leaned toward me with a question in her eyes. I covered her hand and shook my head. Not tonight. Tonight belonged to what had been said and the work that would follow. She nodded and turned to Jason. "When do you start calling business owners tomorrow morning?" he said. She smiled the way women smile when they have waited a long time for a sentence. After coffee, David said his team would capture volunteer hours in a separate field, so nobody mistook community time for billable work. He had seen good efforts derailed by that confusion and did not intend to see it again. Linda asked Jason to send calendar blocks so she could document the plan in his file. There was no sting. It was the paperwork that keeps doors from blowing open. When the checks came, we split them in the way that made sense to each of us. Dad reached for his wallet. Jason touched his arm and took the bill like a son whose hand is steady. Outside, dogs tugged at leashes, and a bus sighed in the cold that comes before the first snow. At the door, Carla said she would email the volunteer coordinator that night. Evan would pull a list of companies that had worked job fairs and might do more. Linda shook my hand and said she would send Jason the compliance language for his note. David thanked Mother for a table that had held a hard talk with dignity. She told him the table had held worse and had not splintered yet. We stood a moment after the night had done its work. Jason told me he would send the first draft to Linda by Thursday and start with an apology to his team in the morning. He did not ask me to review it. I was relieved not to be asked. He said he would keep me updated because it mattered to him that I knew not because he needed anything. I said I heard him. Mother hugged him on the sidewalk. Dad shook his hand. Carla waved. Evan turned up his collar and headed for the train. David promised to check insurance with the nonprofit by noon the next day. Linda said she would send holds for the weekly check-ins and add a midpoint review so no one had to guess whether the plan was working. We walked to our cars without ceremony. The cold hit my face and felt clean. I drove toward Evanston with the radio low. The lights opened and closed like gentle gates. I thought about numbers and the way they make a shape around fragile things. 100 trained, 40 places, 10 businesses ready to offer a first key card. Numbers are not love. They are proof that love learned a skill. Back home, I set my bag on the chair by the door and stood in the quiet of my kitchen. No recap. No phone. I poured water and watched it settle. In the morning, I would call Mother. In a week, we would know if a list had begun its work. Respect is a crop you plant, and visit not a banner you wave. Tonight it was on the ground again. That was enough. February brought a clean blue sky over Chicago, and the kind of cold that makes promises about spring. I was in the kitchen with coffee and a sweater pulled close when the noon newscast turned to a short segment from a North Side community center. The camera caught a row of folding chairs, a banner with a name I knew, and a table stacked with resumes that had pencil marks in the margins. The anchor read the totals as the numbers slid across the screen. 120 people trained, 48 placed into jobs, 12 employers committed to internships. The nonprofit director stood beside a poster board that showed the same figures signed and dated with a line at the bottom that said verified. Jason spoke for less than 20 seconds. He thanked his team and the volunteers and said the work had been done with partners who opened their doors. Then he stepped back and let the director finish. My phone buzzed gently on the counter. Renee sent a note that the nonprofit had posted the same figures on its site and that the comments were exactly what you hope for when the work is real. Alicia forwarded a brief message from David that said Northbridge had accepted the completion of Jason's plan, that the warning had been lifted at the end of November without incident, and that his file now held the trainings, the logs, and the weekly checks that marked a course corrected. I read each message once and filed them next to their neighbors. Boundaries do not complain when they work. They go quiet. At Blackridge, we had been moving on a track of our own. In January, we rolled out a digital skills scholarship for women over 40 in Cook County. Applications opened on a Monday morning and filled by dinner. We set up classes through a community college in Oak Park and arranged a short series of clinics that covered resumes, interview practice, and basic cybersecurity. A small team from our office volunteered to mentor, and our operations budget covered laptops and a year of internet for anyone who needed it to complete the course. We kept it entirely separate from anything tied to Jason. Renee was careful to say that out loud in every planning call. Alicia made sure the paperwork matched the words. Naomi ran her follow-up piece the week after the newscast. She wrote about the way visible repair can change a narrative and about how lines held early gave people room to work rather than perform. She linked to the nonprofit's figures and mentioned the scholarship as a parallel thread that honored the same idea. Fix what you can reach. Keep names that do not belong in public out of public rooms. I sent her a quiet thank you and left it there. On Saturday, we set a small table at our parents' house in Evanston. No centerpieces, no speeches, only the kinds of dishes that know how to share heat. Jason poured water and kept the glasses full without being told. I tossed the salad with my sleeves rolled to my wrists. Mother talked about the library, where she volunteers how a new batch of paperbacks had come in, and how the clerk with the neat handwriting had started labeling the shelves in a way that made the regulars smile. Dad said his morning walks were back on track now that the sidewalks had been salted, and that he had found a route where the wind kept to the other side of the street. We ate and passed bowls, and the room stayed ordinary in the best way. Jason asked if anyone had tried the bakery that opened near the train. Mother said the scones were new, but the coffee was brave. Dad asked me about the scholarship, and I told him that the first cohort was making their way through Lesson 3, and that the mentors were learning as much as the students. Jason said the community center had started a bulletin board for the people who had been placed so that others could see where doors were opening. He did not count. He did not claim. He answered the questions that were asked and let the silence do the rest. After dinner, I cleared plates while Mother wrapped a piece of cake for me to take home. Jason rinsed the bowls and set them where they could drip without leaving rings. Dad wiped the table and shook out the cloth on the back step. Little habits, and all of them better than speeches. When the dishes were done, we sat for a few minutes and listened to the house breathe. The dog settled under the chair and sighed, as if he had been working too. On the way to the door, Mother handed me the small package of leftovers and told me the librarian had asked if I would speak to a group of women who were starting midlife resumes. She said finally I would hear in that room what I must teach myself most days, that beginnings show up in all seasons, and that a good list can be as kind as a hand on your back. I told her I would come. Dad reminded me to check the weather before I drove and to watch the corner by the hardware store where the ice liked to hide. Jason walked me to the car. He said the nonprofit had asked if the campaign could run again in the summer with a few changes that would make it easier to track outcomes. He said he would help as a volunteer and let another person take the lead. He added that he had sent a short note to his team after the broadcast to say thank you, and that he had kept it to 4 sentences just like he had promised. I told him the numbers looked like work, and that work has a way of making respect possible again. He nodded. We did not say anything more. The week after that, we sat through a different kind of quiet. No messages from reporters, no dramatic family news. Only calendars and errands, and a few good stories from people finding their footing. In the evenings, I walked down our block and came home with my hands cold and my mind settled. The memory of that birthday insult did not sting the way it had. It turned into a mark on the timeline, not the headline. The right kind of revenge is not a slam of a door. It is the steady return of fairness, the proof that effort and honesty can change a room. If any of this draws a line to your own life, I hope you will share what you have seen and done. Tell someone you trust. Send a note to a neighbor who kept her word when it was hard. Volunteer where you can. Help keep spaces of respect alive in your home and on your block and in the places where you work. Stories like ours feel better when they make room for someone else to breathe.